Okay, welcome to See, Act, Learn for Climate Justice. And we're going to have a discussion and launch of the video Coming Together for Climate Justice on Loss and Damage. My name is Beth Lormer, and I am the Ecological Justice Program Coordinator for KAIROS Canada. French interpretation is available. Please select the globe on the bottom of your screen and select your preferred language to listen today. L'interprétation en français est disponible aujourd'hui. Veuillez sélectionner le globe en bas de votre écran et choisir votre langue préférée.
There we go.
A few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted while our speakers are sharing today. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat and my colleagues will respond to them. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after our speakers share as well. And please know that the webinar is being recorded in English and French, and we will share that with everyone who registered after today's event. I would like to acknowledge that many of us are joining today from the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples around the world. We acknowledge the original caretakers of the lands and waters and recognize the integral role that Indigenous peoples carry in our work towards climate justice. I acknowledge that I am joining today from the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and I invite you to place your feet on the ground as you are able and take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous territory where you are joining us from today. Thank you. And please, if you would like to share where you're joining us from in the chat, we welcome you to do that and let everyone know who is here in the room today. This event is being co-hosted by KAIROS Canada, the Act Alliance Canada Forum, and Canadian Foodgrains Bank, as well as For the Love of Creation. All of these organizations have come together over many years, but the last couple of years in particular to support global education and advocacy around climate finance for the Global South. Climate finance consists of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage funding to support communities in the Global South who are feeling the brunt of climate change's impacts. I'm going to pass things off to my colleague Danielle Camtier, who will provide an overview, a little bit more of an overview of what loss and damage is for us. And Danielle is the Global Partnerships Coordinator for Africa and Global Climate Justice at KAIROS. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Beth. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. So I will do a brief introduction on what is like loss and damage, just to put us in the mood for this meeting. So we know that loss and damage actually refers to losses and damages that will not otherwise occur if the climate change were not around, as well as various type of losses that exceed a country or community's capacity to adapt. So it is actually, as we know, a general term used by the UN, use or adapt by the UN climate negotiation to refer to the consequences of climate change that go beyond what people can actually adapt to. For example, the loss of coastal heritage sites due to rising sea levels or the loss of homes during natural catastrophes and lives during extreme floods, for example. So all those are what we qualified as loss and damage. So we know that loss and damage can result from extreme weather events, as mentioned before, like cyclones, drought, and heat waves. And in some cases, damage can permanently alter places, like we see like it is the case with the rising seas on low-lying islands, or drought shrinking water supplies, or turning once productive farmland into barren land. Let's briefly touch on Canada's role in the loss and damage. So we know that it is a sad reality that those who have contributed the least to the climate change are the ones that unfortunately are the most affected by loss and damage, which should not be the case. For years and years, low-income countries from the global south have called on high-income countries like Canada, who is the world's seventh highest carbon consumer, to pay their fair share of the losses and damages caused by the global climate crisis, which impact them a lot. So high-income countries like Canada have benefited from the exploitation and excess use of resources to the detriment of other countries. They are also responsible for reducing those harms through compensation for climate-caused losses and recovery from climate-caused damage. What is KAIROS' role in this process? So KAIROS has previously launched a report addressing ecological debt, equity, and justice for climate-related loss and damage, which actually centers on the analysis and experience of partners in the global south around loss and damage. So with the global warming, the losses, the damage happening around the world, we can see with our own eyes that the world is failing to meet targets for greenhouse gas emissions and other SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that were fixed for 2030, which is around the corner. Many communities around the world, especially in the global south, are experiencing loss and damage disproportionately to the global north. And these countries have done the least to cause climate change. Therefore, there's a moral imperative for the global north to prevent and provide reparation to the global south for all these loss and damages related to climate change. And this is why we are actually here today, as my colleague Beth mentioned, to come together and to discuss climate justice on loss and damage and learn more about how we can further support climate justice and loss and damage. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Danielle. We are now going to watch the video Coming Together for Climate Justice on Loss and Damage. And this video, I'll just provide a brief introduction before we hit play. This video was created as a partnership. It was co-produced by ACT Alliance, Canada Forum, Canadian Foodgrains Bank, KAIROS Canada, Presbyterian World Service and Development, the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, and the United Church of Canada, and World Renew. It was a very big collaboration, and we're very grateful for all of the organizations that helped to co-produce this and all the work that they are doing around supporting the countries and communities in the global south who are impacted by climate change. We'll hear a little bit more from some of these partners when our speakers join. After we view the video. But this video was intended to raise awareness around loss and damage funding and to learn about how it supports climate justice if we are able to offer robust loss and damage funding. So we're going to learn about those outcomes. It also speaks to the role that churches have played in supporting global advocacy for climate finance and the role that we can continue to play. And how important it is for this funding to reach those communities that are most impacted. So I'm now going to ask my colleague to hit play, and we will.
An average of 189 million people per year have been affected by extreme weather-related events in the global south since 1991. Extreme climate events have caused $16 million of damage per hour over the last 20 years, according to research by the University of Victoria in Wellington, New Zealand.
In 2013, when Super Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, over 10,000 people were killed in that storm.
In the government of Vanuatu, storms and sea level rise are damaging cultural sites, fracturing local customs, language, and communities, and causing mass displacement.
It's still a challenge for African countries to respond to climate change, regardless of the fact that they are the most affected and they don't have access to the fund.
As climate change continues to devastate our world, these stories become more and more commonplace to the point where we don't even hear them anymore.
The voices of those most impacted by climate change are often ignored, or they face barriers to participate in climate decision-making.
How can the resulting losses and damages, especially suffered by the poorest peoples who have contributed the least to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, how can they be justly and fairly and urgently redressed?
At the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the world leaders agreed to set up a fund on loss and damage, recognizing that many countries are greatly affected by the impacts of extreme weather events that are a result of climate change. The Global Fund is meant to assist countries that don't have the financial means and resources to respond to the impact of climate-induced disasters.
This is a crisis that is our responsibility to help address because we are among the countries who have disproportionately contributed to the crisis that we are in. The only way to hit our fair share reduction target is by contributing to funds like that for losses and damages for the Global South.
In 2022, it was decided that a loss and damage fund would be established. As of January 2024, wealthy countries had pledged less than $700 million US to the fund. Canada committed only $16 million to the fund and was among the donors with the lowest contributions. Losses from climate change in developing countries are estimated to be between $290 and $580 billion annually by 2030. Canada and other wealthy countries need to pay their fair share and scale up their commitments to adequately respond to the impacts experienced by communities in the Global South.
When powerful nations like ours refuse to admit their history of doing harm through their continued reliance on fossil fuel economies, and as human-induced climate catastrophes accelerate, faith communities, who are often responding to crises directly on the ground, cannot help but demand accountability and direct funding for those most vulnerable experiencing losses and damages.
For more than a decade, Canadian and global church voices are among those who have been asking for a global loss and damage fund to assist countries in the Global South that are most affected by climate extremes. The recent establishment of the fund is in part the result of those church advocacy efforts.
The role of churches has been quite instrumental in the work that's happened around loss and damage by trying to meet the needs of the people in these communities, helping them to rebuild homes, to rebuild livelihoods, but also to advocate with their governments more broadly within the international sphere for their needs in these kinds of situations.
We don't know most of the people who are engaged in this struggle, but they are part of us. We are all one human community.
We're going to be continuing to push for funding for loss and damage to make sure that that funding is what's called new and additional, meaning it is outside already announced funding from countries, to make sure that the funding comes in the form of grants and not loans, which only further indebt developing nations for those who have done the least to cause climate change, but who are facing the worst of the effects of climate change.
One of the really encouraging signs is the rising up of youth voices, especially Indigenous youth voices who get it, who understand the necessity of caring for creation, of caring for the land, of caring for the water. The energy and the wisdom of young leaders is now dramatically and deeply influencing our advocacy and analysis as global climate movements.
We need to ensure that we are doing our campaigns, that we are doing our letter writing, that we are doing our advocacy in our communities and to our leadership, that we have a voice within this as we are trying to help those future generations that will ultimately find the benefit of what we are doing today.
Our collective voices have helped to set up the Loss and Damage Fund, but the struggle to ensure vulnerable communities are adequately supported is far from over. Your voice is needed to ensure that climate justice prevails. For more information on what you can do, please visit the website on the screen.
Thank you. And no need to have grabbed that website. My colleagues are going to share that in the chat. So you'll be able to go straight to the site where the video is housed. And we encourage you to watch it again and to share it, show it in your community, play it at church after a service or at a community event. Show it to your family and friends and share it to social media. So we can get the important message of that video out to a wide audience. We heard a little bit about the issue and the impacts in that video, but we now wanted to speak to some partners and some ecumenical voices who are doing this work and who are present at COP29, the UN Climate Change Conference, which is taking place from November 11th to 22nd. In Baku, Azerbaijan. And so we are in the second week of that climate conference. And we're going to hear first from some global partners on the impacts of climate change in their contexts and the importance of what this loss and damage funding can have in responding to those impacts. And we're going to hear from partners, and we're going to then hear from a few ecumenical colleagues. We are going to introduce each speaker. They're going to have about 5 minutes to share with us. I'm going to introduce them by name and their organization, and my colleagues are going to share their bios in the chat, their longer bios in the chat, just so you can learn a little bit more about who they are and what work they do. But just to keep things rolling, I will just do the name and the titles. So first, I'm going to pass things off to Mesfin Mathewas. He's the program manager of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank's Nature Plus program in Ethiopia. And so welcome so much, Mesfin, for being with us, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. Good morning and hi, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, the impact of climate change is huge and massive, and it's recurrently happening from the country where I come, Ethiopia. And just to mention some of them, very recently we had incidents of landslide in southern part of Ethiopia, which killed more than 250 people, and amazingly. Those people who rushed to rescue the households, the papers who were totally swallowed by land, those rescue papers, they also died because of that. And it was because of extended rainfall that we had unusually this year. And those community members, they live in highland area because the land holding size is decreasing, so they had to go to those mountainous areas and to farm. But because of the too much rainfall in less than a minute, we lost that number of people. So that is so sad, and those kinds of things are happening in different times. And property loss, social capital loss, school facilities, health facilities, everything that community lost. The trauma behind to family members and the community is still very much there. So it is really a great loss. Another type, drought recurrently happens in East Africa and Ethiopia. We frequently face that. a year ago. Before that, in southeast part of Ethiopia, we didn't have rain like for 3 to 4, 5 years, and the pastoralists who live their livelihood, their everything is 100% dependent on livestock, and they lost millions of livestock. They don't have insurance system, and that was really taking them back years and the years to restock, and it was great and a massive loss, and that covers to Afar region, Somali region, Borana region, which are very rich in livestock production, and that was a very recent history that we have in our country. And again, in farming communities, drought and dry spell periods force farmers to replant their crops twice, 3 times. They miss planting season when rain delays. They are forced to miss that rainy season, and when they get the first rain, they plant their crop, but dry spell comes so quickly, and crops do not emerge, and they are forced to replant. So those kinds of things are really happening and so many times, and that's loss for them, asset loss. They are forced to sell their household asset, livestock to sell, and that again results in migration of the young generation, especially women. They are forced to move from their area, and that again result in another consequence of challenge on their life, unexpected diseases, loss of property, human trafficking, and psychological and related problems and challenges always happen. Disease also spreads because of climate change. Malaria is one of the top 10 killing diseases in Ethiopia in tropical areas, and malaria never happened in highlands after certain altitudes, but because of climate change, now malaria mosquitoes are spreading up to midland and highland areas. So that's also one of the disease spreading because of climate change. Mosquitoes are adapting to the changing climate, and that also results in loss of life and related consequences. Also dropout or school dropout is also happens so frequently. School dropout, not only because of malaria, drought, and landslide. So many, those things are losses. People who are really frontline people who are affected by climate change impact, they are experiencing that. I think it's good to say something about importance of funding. Funding is very important, first and foremost, to give people hope. Because of climate change and those challenges, those losses, people lose hope. They abandon their area. They abandon their livelihood. They are forced to migrate to areas they never used to live. So if we have funding and support people, they can maintain their lives there. It is very important to have resilience of people. When we have funding, it really gives them resilience. And again, resilience for nature. Biodiversity loss is also very high. I didn't mention that we are losing animal and plant biodiversity. So funding helps us to restore this back and to make our to make our landscape, to make the ecosystem balanced and to have resilient livelihood. So these are some of the things I would like to mention. Importance of funding. If questions will come, I will react. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vespan. And yes, if you have questions, please, anyone, please just type them in the chat and we'll save them for our Q&A. But thank you so much for sharing those words with us. I'm going to keep us rolling, and I'm going to invite Patricia Moncao from, she's the Humanitarian Response Manager for the National Council of Churches in the Philippines. So thank you, Patricia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for opening this space for us to be heard. I am Patricia Moncal, yes, Humanitarian Response Manager from NCCP. I am 29 years old, so that would mean that I am a young woman leading a humanitarian response program in the most disaster-prone country in the world, one of the most at risk in terms of long-term climate change impacts, in the most dangerous country in Asia for environmental defenders. And I want to say that with utmost humility and understanding of my context, but there are so many extremes in that sentence. Christine, Leon, Marce, Nika, Ophel, and Pepito. Those are the names, local names of the most recent tropical cyclones in the Philippines. Two of them were called super typhoons. And I am here right now in Baku, but my heart and my mind is in the Philippines. And that came about um, also in the context of a year full of disasters for us. Earlier this year, let me just rewind a bit of what happened this year. Earlier this year, we started a year with a severe drought, the worst in the decade, caused by the El Nino phenomenon. A month after that, we experienced two extreme typhoons as well, and now we're reaching the end of the year, but a lot could happen in a month. 6 typhoons in 4 weeks. Now I know that Philippines is it's a top disaster-prone country, but I want to tell you and I want to emphasize that this situation is far from normal. And I know that because I am 29 years old. And for the past 2 decades, the world has recorded the most extreme weather events. So I am an expert. I have lived a life of disasters coming from the Philippines. But what does it look like, loss and damage for our communities? So that would mean coming from the severe drought, our farmers, 70% of the Filipino population come from farming communities. So that would mean our farmers have missed the planting season earlier this year. And when the rains came, because most of our agricultural lands rely on the rain for irrigation, when the rains came, it was too much for them, so it destroyed still the crops that no, not the crops, the land that they have tilled. It was inundated in floods, and now for rice and vegetable crops, it is 4 months to 6 months. These 6 typhoons have destroyed what was planted in the delayed planting season. It has some of the crops, especially in the northern part of the Philippines, are just 2 weeks shy from harvest. So we are seeing repeated losses in terms of farming inputs, of farming investments. And I'm telling you, farmers in the Philippines don't own the land that they till, but they are responsible for the farming inputs. So that would mean they shoulder the costs of the seeds, of the fertilizers, and able to plant those crops. And they have and because of these disasters, they are now buried in debt. Now, these are just in the context of disasters. And I would just have to mention, in terms of numbers, just this year, all of these crises combined totals to not less than 406 million US dollars worth of damages to agriculture and infrastructure. That's just a part of it, because we haven't accounted the other economic and non-economic losses. But in terms of agriculture, it's 406 million US dollars already. And I'm telling you, we are not rich to afford that much losses and damages. And that's just in the context of disasters. But what if there is no so-called disaster? We are suffering sea level rise that disrupts our sources for clean potable water. I was able to work with a small island community, coastal community of fisher folk, and they they spend $2 to $3 a day in terms just to get clean water. That is like a month of water utility for me. That's a month's cost. But our fisher folk spend that much because their clean and potable water sources are destroyed by the sea level rise. So that's how it looks like. Even if there is no that so-called extreme weather event and disasters, we are living that every day. And we have seen canceled classes, canceled business days because of extremely hot days. And I'm not even talking about heat waves. It's just the general hot days. We have seen that. And of course, we are doing something. We are not helpless, but we have seen we are now at the context wherein disaster fatigue, typhoon fatigue, repeated evacuees are spreading among the news. It is a common phenomenon now in the Philippines. So we have capacities, we have local actions, but this situation is right now is more than what we can handle. And it doesn't also help that our humanitarian workers, our environmental defenders are also at risk in the Philippines. So I know that the Canadian churches are active and in solidarity with us, and this event is a concrete manifestation for us. So I am calling on you now to help us and support us and be in solidarity with us in our call for climate finance. And when I say climate finance, it is just and real climate finance. It means that it is concrete. We don't want pledges, we want concrete commitments. And these are not charity, these are not aid, these shouldn't be loans, these should be grants that are not tied with any conditionalities that would make our development situation even worse. These should also be accessible for the community-based actions, for community-based climate adaptation initiatives. This should be allocated for loss and damage, for adaptation, and for mitigation as well. And of course, it should be sufficient to our needs. And we cannot do this alone. We need, coming from the Philippines, coming from the Global South, we want solidarity among the Global South, and we want solidarity and collaboration from the Global North as well. Let's show them that we are here united and fighting the same fight. And we are hoping for the same hopes for us. And I was thinking a lot about loss and damage and what it means when we achieve our climate finance goals. Perhaps we could reverse loss and damage, and perhaps we could gain and rebuild what was lost and what was damaged. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Really appreciate your words and your time and the work that you carry. Thank you so much for being with us and speaking with us today. I'm going to pass things to Salome Owonda. She's the Executive Director of the Africa Center for Sustainable and Inclusive Development in Kenya. And just a reminder, if you do have questions, to put them in the chat, and we will try to respond to as many as we can after speakers share. So thank you, Salome, for being with us, and I'll let you speak now.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope you're able to hear me clearly. My name, as has been said, is Salome Owonda, and I'm just going to talk briefly about loss and damage, because what exactly is loss and damage? So loss and damage are those losses and damage that happen or could not have happened if it were not for as a result of climate change. And there are losses and damages that we cannot or have not adapted to and have not mitigated. But then exactly what does it look like in Kenyan context? Because that is where I come from. It's interesting what Mesfin has talked about in Ethiopia. And I think it's because we are both from East Africa region. Our context is almost the same. Most of the time, the issue is floods, the issue is drought. When it's dry, we are impacted, and the most impacted communities are those who are from arid and semi-arid areas, are those who are poor, are those who are at the grassroots level, are those who rely on natural resources for their livelihood. They are majorly the indigenous peoples. During dry seasons, they lose their resources, the economic resources, their livelihood, the source of livelihood. And majorly it is livestock. Majorly it is in the communities that rely on crops, it is the farmland. In Kenya, in between 2020 and 2024, those are the 4 years of the hardest or longest drought experienced in Kenya. During this time, we are told that the communities lost close to 2.6 million livestock. These are communities that rely on livestock 100% for their livelihood. They rely on livestock for education. That is what they sell and get fee for their children. They rely on livestock for their food. So you realize that this disrupts the community system in a big way. During such circumstances, we also experience loss of lives. I'm not sure of the numbers of lives that were lost during that dry season, but recently Kenya experienced one of the worst floods that has happened in the country in a long time. That is this year. And during these floods, we had a register or a record of around 400 people who lost their lives. 400 people is a big number. And you'll find that most of these numbers are women. Most of these people are children. Most of these people are people from the grassroots level, those who do not have resources to adapt to climate change. And that makes it a loss and damage kind of situation. Apart from the loss of lives, we had 13,400 livestock that we also lost during the floods. And that is just few months within 2024. So you realize that the losses and damages affect the community fabric in a very big way. So we have the economic impacts, we have lives that are lost, but then we also have cultural impacts as a result of loss and damage, as a result of climate change. And for us to go beyond this, for us to find a solution, we need policies. Unfortunately, in Kenya right now, we do not have laws on loss and damage. We do not have laws on climate mobility, for example. we have a Disaster Risk Reduction Action Act that is in Parliament right now, bill that is in Parliament right now. It is at the final stages. And we hope that with this act, with this bill, once it becomes an act, we'll be able to have clear structures on how to respond to these disasters as a result of climate. And we hope that with these laws, we'll be able to get the right data to be able to access the loss and damage funds. Because we are told that for you to access the loss and damage funds, you need data. As the Global South, we do not have data to affirm or to speak to the losses and damages that we talk to. We do not have this data. So it means what at the end of it all, when we have these funds ready, then we start working on the data. We need, and that means it's a call to each and every one of us to come out right now to start working on this data with the Global South so that we have data that is ready for action. At the regional level, we have the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change. This is a declaration that speaks on climate mobility. This is a declaration that speaks on climate-induced displacement, which is part of the losses and damages that communities go through. It's good that we have governments supporting this declaration. We have many governments that have signed. We have governments speaking and pushing for this, and thanks to the government of Uganda for championing this, and the government of Kenya for also championing this during the last year's Africa Climate Summit. But this is not enough. We also need action at the global level. At the global level, we keep talking about loss and damage. It's good that last year during the COP28, the discussions around establishing the loss and damage fund was finalized, and we had pledges and underlined pledges, because it's interesting that Patricia talked about the pledges. We need the money, the funds itself, and not just pledges. We had pledges of around 700 million US dollars, but the data that we have shows that for us to be able to take care of the losses and damages in the developing world, we need 400 billion US dollars per year. So note the difference, that we need 400 billion US dollars per year, yet the pledges that we received last year were around 700 million. At this time, as we are in week 2 of COP, the pledges have risen to around 800 million US dollars, way below what is required for us to take care of the losses and damages in developing world. Unfortunately, for us to even have access to these funds, because that is a pledge, it is not yet in the fund. For us to have access to this fund, we need modality on access. We need modality on how to contribute to this money. We do not have the modalities at this point. We have been here for 10 days and there's no agreement on the modality. That means we are not moving forward. We are not at a point where we can even start accessing the 700 or the 800 million US dollars. And even when it's ready, they need data to support, to show that you deserve to access the funds, and we do not have that data. That is the situation that we are in. It is a sad situation, but that is the reality. And it's a call to each and every one of us to play a role that we can, play a role in the data, in the collection and disaggregation of the data in the Global South, to be able to make them able to access these funds. It's a call to each and every one of us who knows the negotiators, our leaders, to call them to action so that we can have decision that is good for the people, that is good for the grassroots people, that is good for the developing communities. That is where we are at, a sad situation, but we need to get a solution. And as Patricia said, yes, we have actions on the ground, but we need much more for our communities to be able to manage the losses and damages as a result of climate action. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Salome. Really appreciate you making the connections between the impact and what the challenges we are hearing and what's being negotiated or not negotiated fast enough at COP. I'm going to pass things to Naomi Johnson, who is going to kind of share a little bit further on what she's hearing at COP29 and maybe in the context of what she's hearing from the Canadian government. Naomi Johnson is with the Canadian Foodgrains Bank. She's a senior policy analyst. Take it away, Naomi.
Great, thank you. And thanks so much. I feel like I barely have much more to say. The speakers have done such a good job from their local context as well. Perhaps I think I'll start just by opening up kind of how the conference here opened with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who talked about the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund as a victory for developing countries, for multilateralism, and for justice. But he said that its initial capitalization of 700 million doesn't come close to righting the wrong inflicted on the vulnerable. 700 million is roughly the annual earnings of the world's 10 best paid footballers. It does not even account for a quarter of the damage in Vietnam caused by the latest hurricane in September. We must get serious about the level of finance required. And I think many of our speakers have talked about that need. It's shocking that at this COP, we have only heard of one more contribution to the fund of 19 million from Sweden, which is, again, very low amount when you think that for the economic damages alone, we're looking at about 400 billion daily is needed, right? And we're right now just over 700 million. So it's really terrible, actually. It's completely unjust. So when we look at this COP, how is loss and damage part of it? Well, the main thing happening at this COP this year is what we call, in a very complicated term, the new collective quantified goal. And all that is a new global goal on what countries should be giving to help others address climate change. So back in 2009, an arbitrary goal of about 100 billion was made, and they said all developed countries should be giving this annually by 2020. Well, guess what? That never happened. We never achieved that goal in 2020. And so we've lost a lot of trust internationally in these structures. And we're seeing the problems get greater and greater, of course. And so going forward now, we're trying to look at this goal much more from a needs-based. What do the countries most affected by these issues, what do they need actually? And how do we ensure they get access to the funding? So a couple of the big key pieces that many of the least developed countries are pushing for is to have loss and damage recognized as a sub-goal, along with adaptation and mitigation in the amount of money that countries give. And so why is that important? It's important because that means that we can track how much should countries roughly be giving in which area, and are they doing their part in getting there? We also want to know what kind of money are they giving, and other speakers referred to this also, that it's really shocking, I think, that the majority of Canada's climate finance is given as loans. So despite acknowledging that we are largely responsible for the problems others are facing due to climate change, we are asking them to pay us back for helping to deal with these problems. It's unbelievable. And so a huge push right now is that we need to make more of this grant-based. When you're helping communities completely affected and you know, where everything's gone to pieces because of some of these storms and some of these major climatic events they're facing, they're not able to be paying back loans and then getting into further debt, right? So major issues, and we want to make sure this is new finances as well. That we're not saying, oh, we'll pull away from aid. We just won't invest as much in health or in refugees or these kind of things, so we can help them with this. That's not the way it goes. This has to be new money. It has to be grant-based, and we need to make sure loss and damage is in here. So where are we at right now? Well, perhaps not surprisingly, this has been a very difficult, contentious issue. There are many factors that are being debated on what this goal should look like. How much should be completely directed from public finance? How much should be mobilized from other areas or innovative finance? There's many different ways. Who should it go to? How should they access it? Who should be paying? All of these different issues are coming to play. And so despite having worked on this for years, really, we got to a point after week one where we had nothing to show really in terms of what happened in negotiators. So am I saying that this is a waste of time? Absolutely not. I mean, I think we need to remember these are our key places where these negotiations happen. There is nowhere else where countries are coming together and talking about these issues and working through them and making things happen. It's policy. It takes a long time when you think about all the different political challenges, the conflicts out there. We all know what's going on in the world right now. It's not easy to look past all of those things and make progress, but progress does happen slowly. And so we continue to push, and I'm continuously amazed by the amount of people here at COP that are working together to make this happen behind the scenes. And so now we're at the point where these negotiations have gone to more of a ministerial level, but there are still some negotiators involved as well. And I think we are starting to see a little bit of progress. As pressure is applied, people are willing to compromise, they're talking through the issues a little more, and we are very hopeful that we will achieve many of the goals that these countries have. And so again, just really encourage all of you, and thank you so much for your support as we work through this.
Thank you, Naomi. I really appreciate that brief overview. We're going to, in just a few minutes, share a little bit more about what we can all do in this room together and what we can be doing on this in Canada. But I'm just going to let Simon take maybe 1 to 2 minutes instead of 5, unfortunately, just to share a little bit about what the global church is doing and how we can respond from Canada. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth, and thank you everybody for being on this call. I think our speakers have already talked quite a bit about what is already happening by churches working together, because it's not just at the global level, but it's also at the local level. People like Patricia, who are working on behalf of the ecumenical movement of churches around the Philippines in disaster response, but also in advocacy. From ACT Alliance's perspective, we encourage advocacy to be happening at the national levels, where we train people in how to engage in advocacy with their own governments, because the work of COP that's happening here right now isn't something that people just show up not having talked about it at all during the year. These conversations are happening within countries all through the year. And so we need to be involved all through that conversation time, not just showing up when the world is in Baku or Belém or wherever we happen to be, but we need to be part of what's happening in our countries all the way through. So we at the global level are training people in that work. We're working with people on the regional levels in the Asia and the Pacific, where there are similarities that are happening, where people need to come together to talk and share together, both in theological and spiritual ways, but also in practical ways, on how they can support each other and they can be in solidarity, as Patricia was saying. And we also work at the global level in spaces like COP, in the meetings that happen between COPs, at the UN for the Climate Action Week. And we're here now. There are people from around the world who are part of the broader ecumenical movement here at COP, at least 40 or 50 people. We had 33 people on our call just an hour ago talking about what was going on. So that work continues, and it is literally people from around the world who are here as observers to what's happening, or who are here on behalf of their governments who are here. We have bishops and priests who are here. We have lay people who are here, all of us raising our voices to stand up for climate justice, because we have a moral voice and a role as faith in that space. And I know we don't have much time, so I just want to close with what our head of our climate program at ACT Alliance told us less than an hour ago, which was, he said that this is not the time to give up on loss and damage in these negotiations, even though it feels challenging and difficult, and getting to the quantum, the number, is going to be very difficult, and getting the sub-goals into the NCQG is going to take a lot of work. We cannot give up. We have to stand for what we believe in. We have to push for what is right and just, and for the needs of communities like those we've heard about around the world. So we're going to continue to advocate here. And we know that there are Christians around the world who are praying and who are acting in your own contexts to make sure that things are happening. And so we thank you for the support that you're providing as well.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that and for sharing those words. Really appreciate hearing what's happening and how the church is responding at COP29. So as we have heard, there are things that are being done. There are so many hands that are carrying this work, and we can be part of that action as well. We launched this video as well with a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau and the ministers that are responsible for responding to climate change and climate finance needs in the Global South. My colleagues have put a link to that letter in the chat, so I encourage you to sign it and to share that letter with your friends, colleagues, and church community, and have them sign as well. This letter we will kind of keep this letter active for a few months. It is a message to kind of go to the Canadian government ahead of the next federal budget. So we're looking for Canada to ramp up its commitments in its next budget announcement. And we encourage you to share the letter as well as with the video. There's some more resources on the link that we shared to the video and on the KAIROS website. So please take a look at those and share those around, as well as from all of the collaborating organizations that are on this call. We'll be adding all the websites just a moment so that you can follow the work that everyone is doing on this issue. We encourage you to stay tuned for further actions as we work towards the next federal budget in Canada, and as Canada prepares to host the G7 next year. So Canada will play a leadership role, and this is one of those issues where we can call on the Canadian government to show leadership. We are also entering a Jubilee year next year, where the ecumenical community will be calling for debt cancellation, and we'll be making connections between debt cancellation and climate justice. As Patricia pointed out, we cannot further indebt countries in the Global South with loss and damage funding, and so it needs to be in the form of grants, and it needs to be free of conditions. And so that those calls for climate justice will be very much a part of the Jubilee debt campaign, and so we encourage you to stay tuned for information about that. As we close here, we're in our kind of final minutes. I'm going to pass things to Guy from the Presbyterian World Service and Development just to provide a few closing remarks. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you, Beth. As we know now, the ball is in our court, and all of us who are on this call, we've seen this video that is 6 minutes long, and it's broadly available now to all to show in your churches and to encourage now the next steps to continue to take action so that we can continue to make a difference and move our governments to step up to the challenge. So our Christian voices are needed more than ever. I want to take the opportunity to thank those who joined us today from Baku. It's quite an honor to be there in the heart of the COP conversations. Thank you for bringing your voices to us. Thank you to Mesfin and Patricia and Salome for sharing their stories from Ethiopia, from the Philippines, and from Kenya. That makes our world smaller and tighter, and we are therefore better connected. And we feel the need for this great solidarity that we have as a Christian community. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you for those who sponsored this event and the video. KAIROS Canada, ACT Alliance Canada Forum, the Canadian Foodgrains Bank, and For the Love of Creation, and all of the member churches that are members of all of these alliances. So thank you so much. And now it's our turn to take action.